unlikely encounter. The vast emptiness of space stretched out before Zack Ryder's weathered freighter, the Lucky Break. Zack, a grizzled human scavenger in his late 30s, sat alone in the cockpit, his calloused hands dancing over the controls. His deep-set eyes, surrounded by crow's feet earned from years of squinting into the void, scanned the radar for any sign of salvage. Zack had been alone for so long he'd almost forgotten the sound of another voice. The isolation suited him just fine. Out here, he didn't have to deal with the mess of human interaction. His last crew had abandoned him years ago, tired of his prickly personality and obsessive drive to find the next big score. Since then, he'd modified the Lucky Break to run with a crew of one, and he preferred it that way. As the ship drifted through an uncharted asteroid field, a faint blip on the radar caught Zack's attention. He leaned forward, adjusting the scanners to get a better read. Well, he muttered to himself, his voice rough from disuse. What have we got here? The blip resolved into a small object, no bigger than an escape pod, tumbling slowly through space. Zack's heart rate quickened. Escape pods often meant valuable salvage, emergency supplies, advanced tech, or if he was really lucky, precious data cores that could fetch a fortune on the black market. With practiced ease, Zack maneuvered the Lucky Break closer to the pod. As he approached, he noticed odd markings on its surface, definitely not of human origin. Alien tech was even better. It could set him up for life if he played his cards right. Zack suited up and prepared for a spacewalk. He double-checked his gear, making sure his magnetic boots were functioning and his tether was secure. With a deep breath, he cycled through the airlock and pushed off towards the alien pod. As he drew closer, Zack's helmet lights illuminated the pod's surface. The markings were like nothing he'd ever seen before, swirling patterns that seemed to shift and change as he moved. He ran a gloved hand over the smooth metal, searching for a way in. Suddenly, a section of the pod's hull retracted, revealing a transparent panel. Zack's eyes widened as he peered inside. Curled up in the cramped space was a figure that was unmistakably alien. The creature was humanoid in shape, with iridescent blue skin and delicate, almost translucent features. But what struck Zack most was that where its legs should have been, there were only stumps, wrapped in some kind of advanced medical dressing. For a moment, Zack considered leaving the pod and its occupant behind. Alien encounters rarely ended well for humans, and he had no desire to get caught up in whatever trouble this creature was fleeing from. But as he watched, the alien's eyes fluttered open, revealing startling silver irises. Those eyes locked onto Zack's, and he saw something he recognized all too well: fear, pain, and a desperate plea for help. In that moment, something shifted inside him. He'd been alone for so long, convinced that he was better off that way. But faced with another being in need, he felt a long-dormant part of himself stir to life. With a muttered curse, Zack began the process of attaching tow cables to the escape pod. He knew he was probably making a huge mistake, but he couldn't bring himself to abandon the injured alien to the cold emptiness of space. As he worked, the alien inside the pod pressed a hand against the transparent panel. Zack paused, meeting those silver eyes again. He saw gratitude there, and something else, a fierce determination to live. Despite himself, Zack felt a grudging respect for the creature's will to survive. Once the pod was secured, Zack returned to the Lucky Break and carefully maneuvered it back to the ship's small cargo bay. As the bay doors closed behind him, he felt the weight of his decisions settle on his shoulders. He had no idea what he was getting himself into, but there was no turning back now. Zack cycled through decontamination and removed his spacesuit before approaching the alien pod. He studied the control panel, trying to decipher the strange symbols. After a few tense moments, he managed to trigger the opening mechanism. The pod hissed open, releasing a cloud of sweet-smelling vapor. The alien inside stirred, struggling to sit up. Up close, Zack could see that its injuries were even worse than he'd first thought. Besides the missing legs, There were burns and cuts all over its slender body. "Easy there," Zack said, his voice gentler than he'd intended. "You're safe now." "Well, as safe as you can be on a rust bucket like this." The alien's silver eyes fixed on him, and to Zack's surprise, it spoke. The words were garbled and strange, but he could make out the general meaning. "Thank you, human." Zack blinked in surprise. "You speak English?" The alien shook its head weakly. "Universal, translator, implant," it managed to say, tapping the side of its head. "Handy," Zack remarked. He hesitated, then asked, "Can you tell me what happened to you? Who did this?" The alien's face contorted in what Zack assumed was pain or fear. "Hunted," it whispered. "Must hide." Zack felt a chill run down his spine. Whatever was after this creature was bad news, and he'd just painted a target on his own back by rescuing it. But looking at the injured alien, he knew he couldn't just dump it at the nearest port and wash his hands of the situation. "All right," he said with a sigh. "Let's get you patched up. Then we can figure out what to do next." As Zack carefully lifted the alien from the pod, he was struck by how light it was. Its body was warm to the touch, and he could feel a rapid heartbeat, or whatever passed for a heart in its species, through its thin, silky skin. He carried the alien to the ship's small medical bay, grateful for once that he'd splurged on decent medical equipment. As he laid the creature on the examination table, its hand gripped his arm with surprising strength. "Name," the alien said, its silver eyes intense. "What is your name?" Zack hesitated, then answered, "Zack Ryder." The alien's lips curved in what might have been a smile. "Zack," it repeated, as if testing the sound. Then it placed a hand on its own chest. "Lyra, I am Lyra." As Zack began to treat Lyra's wounds, he found himself talking more than he had in years. He explained what he was doing, described the various tools and medicines he was using, and even cracked a few rusty jokes. Lyra listened intently, asking questions when it could muster the strength. Hours passed as Zack worked, cleaning and dressing Lyra's injuries. The alien's physiology was different from a human's, but similar enough that he could make do with his supplies. As he finished, he noticed Lyra had fallen into a fitful sleep. Zack stood back, wiping sweat from his brow. He looked at the sleeping alien, feeling a mix of emotions he couldn't quite sort out. Part of him still screamed that this was a mistake, that he should dump Lyra at the nearest station and forget this ever happened. But another part, a part he thought he'd buried long ago, felt a sense of purpose he hadn't known in years. With a weary sigh, Zack settled into a chair next to the medical bed. He'd rest for a bit, he told himself, just to make sure Lyra was stable. As he drifted off to sleep, his last thought was that his life had just gotten a whole lot more complicated, and strangely, he didn't mind as much as he thought he would. Zack awoke with a start, his neck stiff from sleeping in the chair. For a moment, he was disoriented, wondering why he was in the medical bay. Then he saw Lyra on the bed, and the events of the previous day came rushing back. The alien was awake, those silver eyes regarding him with a mix of curiosity and caution. "You stayed," Lyra said, her voice clearer now, but still tinged with an otherworldly accent. Zack shrugged, trying to ignore the twinge in his back as he straightened up. "Someone had to make sure you didn't die in your sleep. Bad for business, having corpses on board." Lyra's face contorted in what Zack was beginning to recognize as a smile. "Your bedside manner needs work, Zack Ryder." Despite himself, Zack felt the corner of his mouth twitch upward. He stood, stretching out the kinks in his muscles. "How are you feeling?" "Better, thanks to you," Lyra replied. She attempted to sit up, wincing as she did so. Zack moved to help her, supporting her back as she adjusted her position. "Though I fear I'm still quite incomplete." Zack's eyes were drawn to where Lyra's legs should have been. The stumps were wrapped in clean bandages, but he could see faint lines of light pulsing beneath the dressings. "About that," he said, his curiosity getting the better of him. "What happened to your legs?" Lyra's expression darkened. They were taken by those who hunt me. Taken? Zach repeated, a chill running down his spine. Why would they take your legs? My people, we are not like humans, Lyra explained. Our bodies are integrated with technology. My legs were not just limbs, but advanced cybernetic enhancements. Valuable technology that my pursuers wished to acquire. Zach whistled low. So they just cut them off. Lyra nodded grimly. They would have taken more, but I managed to escape. Barely. Zach ran a hand through his unkempt hair, trying to process this information. Look, I don't mean to be insensitive, but this sounds like the kind of trouble I don't need. Maybe we should find you a safe port, somewhere you can. No, Lyra's outburst startled them both. She reached out, gripping Zach's arm with surprising strength. Please, I have nowhere else to go, no one else to turn to. If you leave me at a port, they will find me. And they will not stop at my legs next time. Zach looked into those pleading silver eyes and felt his resolve crumbling. He'd spent years cultivating a reputation as a loner, someone who looked out for himself and no one else. But something about Lyra's desperate situation stirred long-dormant feelings of empathy. All right, he sighed, knowing he was probably going to regret this. You can stay, for now, but we need to figure out a plan. I can't exactly smuggle you around the galaxy forever. Relief washed over Lyra's face. Thank you, Zach. I promise I will not be a burden. In fact, I believe I can be of great assistance to you. Zach raised an eyebrow. How's that? No offense, but you're not exactly in fighting shape. Lyra's lips curved in a mysterious smile. My legs may be gone, but my mind remains intact, and my people's technology is far beyond anything you've encountered. With your help, I believe I can construct new legs for myself, and in return, I can upgrade your ship in ways you've never imagined. Zach's interest was piqued despite his better judgment. The Lucky Break was a decent ship, but it was always in need of repairs and upgrades he could barely afford. What kind of upgrades are we talking about? Faster-than-light travel capabilities, advanced cloaking technology, weapon systems that could rival a small fleet. Lyra's eyes sparkled with excitement. Your ship could become the envy of every scavenger and smuggler in the galaxy. For the first time in years, Zach felt a spark of genuine excitement. The possibilities Lyra was describing were beyond his wildest dreams, but a lifetime of caution made him hesitate. This all sounds great, he said slowly, but what's the catch? Why would you share this kind of tech with me? Lyra's expression turned solemn. Because I need your help, Zach. Not just to hide, but to fight back. The beings who hunt me, they threaten not just my people, but countless species across the galaxy. With your ship and my technology, we could make a difference. We could save lives. Zach leaned back, feeling the weight of Lyra's words settle on his shoulders. He'd spent so long looking out for only himself, the idea of fighting for a greater cause seemed almost absurd. And yet, he couldn't deny the pull he felt towards this strange alien and her mission. I'm not a hero, he said finally. I'm just a scavenger trying to get by. Lyra reached out, placing her hand on his. Her touch was warm, almost electric. Perhaps that is exactly what the galaxy needs right now. Not a polished hero, but a survivor. Someone who knows how to navigate the shadows and come out alive. Zach looked at their joined hands, then back at Lyra's earnest face. He knew he was standing at a crossroads. He could walk away now, drop Lyra off somewhere safe, and return to his solitary existence. Or he could take a chance, embark on an adventure that could change not just his life, but the fate of the galaxy. With a wry smile, Zach made his decision. All right, Lyra, you've got yourself a partner. But if we're going to do this, we're going to need a plan. And some serious upgrades. Lyra's face lit up with a smile that seemed to illuminate the entire room. Then let us begin, Zach Ryder. We have much work to do. Over the next few days, the Lucky Break became a hive of activity. Zach helped Lyra move around the ship, setting up a makeshift workshop in the cargo bay. He watched in amazement as Lyra's delicate hands manipulated tools and materials with incredible precision, creating intricate components that he could barely comprehend. As they worked, they talked. Zach found himself opening up to Lyra in ways he hadn't with anyone in years. He told her about his childhood on a crowded Earth, his dreams of exploring the stars, and the series of disappointments and betrayals that had led him to his solitary life as a scavenger. In turn, Lyra shared stories of her own world, a place of soaring crystal spires and vast underground networks where organic and technological life had merged into something truly alien. She spoke of her people's achievements, but also of the internal conflicts that had made them vulnerable to outside threats. As Lyra's new legs took shape, so too did the upgrades to the Lucky Break. Zach marveled at the changes, watching as his battered old freighter transformed into something sleek and powerful. New systems came online, giving him capabilities he'd only dreamed of before. Finally, after what felt like weeks of non-stop work, Lyra announced that she was ready to test her new legs. Zach helped her attach the gleaming cybernetic limbs, watching in awe as they seamlessly integrated with her body. Lyra took a deep breath, then slowly stood. Her first steps were wobbly, but soon she was walking with growing confidence. Tears glistened in her silver eyes as she turned to Zach, a radiant smile on her face. "We did it," she said softly. "Thank you, Zach. You've given me back a part of myself I thought was lost forever." Zach felt a lump in his throat, overwhelmed by the emotion of the moment. "Don't mention it," he managed to say. "Couldn't have you rolling around my shit forever, could I?" Lyra laughed, a sound like tinkling crystals that made Zach's heart skip a beat. She took a few more experimental steps, then broke into a run, her new legs carrying her with inhuman grace and speed. As he watched her, Zach realized that something fundamental had changed. He was no longer just a lone scavenger, scraping by on the fringes of society. He was part of something bigger, something that mattered. But before he could fully process this revelation, alarms began blaring throughout the ship. Lyra froze, her face paling to a lighter shade of blue. "They found us," she whispered, fear evident in her voice. Zach's hand went to the new weapon at his hip, a creation of Lyra's that packed more firepower than anything he'd owned before. "Then I guess it's time to test out these upgrades," he said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. As they raced to the cockpit, Zach knew that their real adventure was just beginning. Whatever came next, he and Lyra would face it together. And for the first time in years, Zack Ryder wasn't alone anymore. The pursuit begins. The cockpit of the Lucky Break erupted into a cacophony of alarms and flashing lights as Zack threw himself into the pilot's seat. His fingers flew across the newly upgraded control panel, bringing up holographic displays that showed their dire situation. 3 ships, he announced, his voice tight with tension. "Looks like heavy cruisers. Definitely not your average pirates or law enforcement." Lyra leaned over his shoulder, her silver eyes scanning the readouts. "No," she agreed, her voice grim. "Those are Shadow Corp vessels, elite hunters and technology scavengers. They're the ones who—" She trailed off, her hand unconsciously moving to touch her newly attached legs. Zack's jaw clenched. He'd heard whispers about Shadow Corp in the darkest corners of space stations and smuggler hideouts. They were notorious for their ruthless pursuit of advanced alien tech, leaving a trail of destruction in their wake. "Well," he said, forcing a grin, "let's see if your upgrades are as good as you claimed." He punched in a series of commands, and the Lucky Break lurched forward, its new engines humming with power. The ship accelerated at a rate that would have torn apart its old frame, streaking away from the approaching cruisers. For a moment, Zack allowed himself to hope they might simply outrun their pursuers, but a violent shudder through the ship dashed that notion. "They'd locked on with tractor beams," he growled, wrestling with the controls. Lyra's face set in determination. "Activate the phase shift drive," she instructed, "the one we installed yesterday." Zack's hand hovered over an unfamiliar control. "You sure about this? We haven't had time to test it. No time like the present, Lyra replied with a wry smile. Taking a deep breath, Zack engaged the drive. The view outside the cockpit windows shimmered and distorted, as if reality itself was bending around them. Then, with a lurch that Zack felt in his very bones, the lucky brake slipped free of the tractor beams and shot forward at an impossible speed. Stars became streaks of light, then merged into a swirling tunnel of color. Zack's stomach churned, and he gripped the controls with white-knuckled intensity. Beside him, Laura monitored the readouts, her face tense with concentration. "We can't maintain this for long," she warned. "The drive wasn't meant for a ship of this size. We need to drop out of phase space soon, or we risk tearing ourselves apart." Zack nodded, sweat beading on his forehead. "Any ideas where we should aim for?" Laura's fingers danced over the navigation console. "There," she said, pointing to a small cluster of planets on the star chart. "The Nix Nebula. Its radiation and gravitational anomalies should mask our signature and make it difficult for Shadow Corp to track us." With a grunt of acknowledgement, Zack adjusted their course. Moments later, he disengaged the phase shift drive, and the lucky brake burst back into normal space with a bone-jarring thud. The swirling gases of the Nix Nebula filled their view, shot through with veins of cosmic lightning. As Zack maneuvered the ship deeper into the nebula's concealing embrace, he let out a long breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "That was too close," he muttered. Lyra nodded, her usual composure shaken. "They found us far quicker than I anticipated. Shadow Corp's resources are even more vast than I feared." Zack turned to face her, his expression serious. "All right, Lyra, I think it's time you gave me the full story. Who exactly are you, and why is Shadow Corp so desperate to get their hands on you?" Lyra was quiet for a long moment, her silver eyes distant as if looking at something far beyond the confines of the ship. When she spoke, her voice was heavy with the weight of secrets long held. "I am not just any member of my species, Zack. I am, or was, the lead scientist of our most advanced cybernetics division. My work pushed the boundaries of what was possible, merging organic and synthetic life in ways that could revolutionize existence for countless species." She paused, her hand absently tracing the seam where her new legs joined her body. "But there were those among my people who feared my research. They believed we were losing touch with our organic roots, becoming too reliant on technology. They tried to destroy my work, to erase years of progress." Zack listened intently, pieces of the puzzle starting to fall into place. "And that's when Shadow Corp got involved." Lyra nodded. "They offered protection, resources, in exchange for access to my research. I refused, of course. But they were not interested in taking no for an answer. They attacked our research facility, killed my colleagues." Her voice broke. "They took my legs as a sample of my work. I only barely escaped." Zack felt a surge of anger on Lyra's behalf, mixed with a growing sense of the danger they were in. "So now they're after you to get the rest of your research. The knowledge in your head." "Yes," Lyra confirmed. "But it's more than that. The work I was doing, it could change the balance of power in the galaxy. In the wrong hands, it could be used to create unstoppable armies, to subjugate entire species. Shadow Corp must be stopped, Zack. Not just for my sake, but for the sake of all sentient life." The weight of her words settled over the cockpit like a heavy blanket. Zack ran a hand through his hair, trying to process the enormity of the situation he'd stumbled into. He was just a scavenger, used to worrying about his next meal and staying one step ahead of creditors. Now he was caught up in a conflict that could determine the fate of the galaxy. But as he looked at Lyra, saw the mixture of fear and determination in her eyes, he knew he couldn't walk away. Whatever came next, they were in this together. "All right," he said finally, squaring his shoulders. "So what's our next move?" Lyra's expression softened with relief and gratitude. "We need allies," she said. "My people are too far and likely compromised. But I know of others who have reason to stand against Shadow Corp. Resistance fighters, rogue scientists, even some government officials who haven't been bought off. Zack nodded, already thinking through the logistics. I've got some contacts in the underworld who might be able to help. People who owe me favors or have no love for corps like Shadow Corp. Good, Lyra said. We'll need all the help we can get. But first, she gestured to the nebula outside. We should use this time to further upgrade the lucky break. I have ideas for improvements that could give us a real edge. A slow grin spread across Zack's face. Despite the danger, despite the enormous stakes, he felt more alive than he had in years. Well then, partner, he said, extending his hand to Lyra. Let's get to work. As Lyra took his hand, Zack felt a spark of electricity that had nothing to do with her cybernetic nature. They were an unlikely pair, a cynical human scavenger and a brilliant alien scientist, but together, they just might have a chance to change the course of history. The lucky break drifted deeper into the Nix Nebula, its occupants unaware that their actions had already set in motion events that would reshape the galaxy. The real adventure was just beginning. Uncovering the truth. The days blurred together as Zack and Lyra worked tirelessly to upgrade the lucky break, transforming the once humble freighter into a technological marvel. The swirling gases of the Nix Nebula provided a constantly shifting backdrop to their efforts, a reminder of both the beauty and danger that surrounded them. As they worked side by side, Zack found himself growing increasingly fascinated by Lyra. Her brilliance was evident in every modification she made, every line of code she wrote. But it was her determination, her unwavering commitment to her cause, that truly impressed him. One day, as they took a rare break from their labors, Zack broached a question that had been nagging at him. Lyra, he began, watching her delicate blue fingers dance over a holographic interface, you said your work could change the balance of power in the galaxy. What exactly were you working on? Lyra's hands stilled, and she turned to face him, her silver eyes unreadable. Are you sure you want to know, Zack? Once I tell you, there's no going back. The knowledge itself could put you in danger. Zack let out a dry chuckle. Pretty sure I crossed that bridge when I fished you out of that escape pod. Come on, hit me with it. Lyra nodded, her expression turning serious. Very well. My research, it was focused on what we called quantum neural integration. In essence, it's a way to link organic minds directly with quantum computers. Zack frowned, trying to wrap his head around the concept. Okay, so, super advanced brain-computer interfaces. That doesn't sound galaxy-shattering. It's more than that, Lyra explained, her eyes lighting up with passion for her work. Imagine being able to process information at quantum speeds, to access vast databases of knowledge instantly, to control complex systems with a mere thought. And now imagine that capability spread across an entire population, all minds linked in a vast, instantaneous network. As the implications began to sink in, Zack felt a chill run down his spine. That's incredible. And terrifying. I can see why Shadow Corp wants to get their hands on it. Lyra nodded grimly. In the right hands, it could usher in an unprecedented era of peace and prosperity. In the wrong hands, it could create an unstoppable army of cyborg soldiers, Zack finished. Or enslave entire planets. Exactly, Lyra said softly. That's why we can't let Shadow Corp obtain this technology. The consequences would be catastrophic. Zack leaned back, running a hand through his hair. No pressure or anything, he muttered. Then, straightening up, he asked, So, what's our next move? Before Lyra could answer, an alarm blared through the ship. Zack lunged for the console, his heart racing. Proximity alert, he announced. Something's coming through the nebula. They rushed to the cockpit, watching tensely as a battered freighter emerged from the swirling gases. It was an older model than the Lucky Break, its hull scared and patched. Think it's Shadow Corp? Zack asked, his hand hovering over the weapon's controls. Lyra shook her head, her eyes narrowed. No, this is something else. She leaned forward, studying the ship intently. Suddenly, her eyes widened in recognition. "Zach, open a communication channel." Bewildered but trusting her instincts, Zach complied. A moment later, a gruff voice crackled over the speakers. "Unknown vessel, this is Captain Malik of the Star Wanderer. We mean you no harm. We're seeking refuge from Shadowcorp forces." Lyra's face lit up. "Malik, it's me, Lyra. We thought you were dead." There was a moment of stunned silence, then an explosion of joyous exclamations from the other ship. As Zach watched in amazement, Lyra explained that Malik had been one of her colleagues, a fellow scientist who had helped her escape when Shadowcorp attacked their facility. Soon, the Star Wanderer was docked with the Lucky Break, and Zach found himself face to face with Captain Malik, a burly, four-armed alien with mottled green skin and eyes that seemed to glow from within. The captain enveloped Lyra in a crushing embrace, his joy at finding her alive palpable. As the initial excitement settled, they gathered in the Lucky Break's small common area to exchange information. Malik's news was grim. Shadowcorp's influence was spreading rapidly, with more and more worlds falling under their sway. "They're using some kind of mind control technology," Malik explained, his voice heavy with concern. "It's crude compared to your work, Lyra, but effective. They're building an army, and I fear they're close to making their move for galactic domination." Lyra's face paled, her silver eyes wide with horror. "It's worse than we thought," she whispered. "We have to stop them." Zach, who had been listening intently, leaned forward. "Okay, so we know what we're up against. But how do we fight an enemy this powerful? We're just 3 people with 2 ships." Malik's glowing eyes fixed on Zach, a hint of a smile on his alien features. "Ah, but we're not alone. There's a resistance forming, a coalition of those who see the threat Shadowcorp poses. Scientists, freedom fighters, even some planetary governments who've managed to stay independent. We've been searching for Lyra, hoping her knowledge could turn the tide." Hope blossomed in Lyra's expression. "Then we have a chance," she said, her voice gaining strength. "With the upgrades we've made to the Lucky Break and the information I carry, we can make a real difference." Zach nodded slowly, a plan beginning to form in his mind. "All right, so we join up with this resistance, but we'll need to be smart about it. Shadowcorp's bound to have spies everywhere." As they began to hash out the details of their next move, Zach felt a strange mix of emotions. Part of him still couldn't believe he was involved in something so vast, so important. He was used to looking out for himself, not trying to save the galaxy. But as he looked at Lyra, saw the fire in her eyes and the determination in her stance, he knew he was exactly where he needed to be. The path ahead would be dangerous, filled with challenges they could scarcely imagine. But for the first time in years, Zach Ryder felt like he was part of something bigger than himself. And as the Lucky Break and the Star Wanderer prepared to leave the safety of the Nyx Nebula, he realized that he wouldn't have it any other way. Together, this unlikely crew, a human scavenger, an alien scientist, and a battle-worn captain, were about to embark on a mission that would determine the fate of countless worlds. The real fight was just beginning, and the galaxy would never be the same. The final stand. The Lucky Break and the Star Wanderer emerged from the swirling gases of the Nyx Nebula, their hulls gleaming with new modifications. Over the past weeks, Zach, Lyra, and Malik had worked tirelessly to prepare for the confrontation that lay ahead. As they approached the coordinates Malik had provided, a massive space station came into view. Unlike the sleek, corporate designs favored by Shadowcorp, this station was a patchwork of different architectural styles, a physical representation of the diverse coalition that had formed to resist the corporation's tyranny. "Welcome to Haven," Malik announced, his voice tinged with pride. "The last free port in this sector, and the heart of the resistance." Zach whistled low as he maneuvered the Lucky Break towards the docking bay. "Impressive. How have they managed to stay hidden from Shadowcorp?" Lyra, who had been quiet for much of their approach, spoke up. "A combination of advanced cloaking technology and strategic positioning. Haven exists in a pocket of subspace, facing in and out of normal space-time. It makes it nearly impossible to detect unless you know exactly where to look. As they docked and made their way into the station, Zack was struck by the bustling activity. Aliens of all shapes and sizes hurried through the corridors, their voices creating a cacophony of languages. The air was thick with tension and purpose. They were led to a large, circular room that seemed to serve as the Resistance's command center. Holograms flickered in the air, displaying star charts, troop movements, and streams of data. At the center of it all stood a tall, willowy alien with iridescent skin and eyes that seemed to hold galaxies within them. "Zack, Lyra," Malek said, his voice reverent, "I'd like you to meet Admiral Genva, the leader of our resistance." The Admiral inclined her head in greeting, her voice melodious, yet carrying an undercurrent of steel. "Welcome to Haven. Your arrival could not have come at a more critical time." With a wave of her hand, Genva brought up a new hologram, this one showing a massive fleet of ships gathering near a red giant star. "This is Shadowcorp's main armada," she explained. "Our intelligence suggests they're preparing for a major offensive, one that could bring half the galaxy under their control in a matter of days." Lyra stepped forward, her silver eyes blazing with determination. "We can't let that happen. With the upgrades we've made to our ships, and the knowledge I carry, we might have a chance to stop them." Genva nodded, a grim smile on her face. "Indeed, that's why we've been gathering our own fleet. Every free world, every independent colony, every ship that still values freedom has answered our call. But even so, we're outnumbered and outgunned." Zack, who had been taking all this in with a mixture of awe and trepidation, finally spoke up. "So what's the plan? We can't just throw ourselves at their fleet and hope for the best." The Admiral's eyes locked onto Zack, and he felt as if she were peering into his very soul. "You're right, of course. That's where you come in. We need a small team to infiltrate Shadowcorp's flagship while our fleet engages their armada. If we can take out their command and control systems, we might have a chance." Lyra's face lit up with understanding. "And with my knowledge of their systems, we could do more than just disable them. We could turn their own technology against them." As the details of the plan were hashed out, Zack found himself volunteering for the most dangerous part of the mission. He, Lyra, and a small team of elite operatives would use the Lucky Break's advanced cloaking technology to slip past Shadowcorp's defenses and board their flagship. The next few days were a whirlwind of preparation. The Lucky Break was further modified, turning it into the perfect stealth vessel. Zack and Lyra trained relentlessly with their team, preparing for every possible scenario. Finally, the day of the attack arrived. As the Resistance fleet prepared to jump into the Shadowcorp-controlled system, Zack found a quiet moment with Lyra in the Lucky Break's cockpit. "You know," he said, his voice uncharacteristically soft, "when I picked up your escape pod, I never imagined it would lead to all this." Lyra turned to him, her silver eyes shimmering with emotion. "Do you regret it?" Zack shook his head, a wry smile on his face. "Nah. For the first time in years, I feel like I'm doing something that matters, something bigger than just scraping by." Lyra reached out, her hand gently touching his. "Whatever happens, Zack, I want you to know, I'm grateful for everything." Their eyes met, and for a moment, the impending battle faded away. There was so much left unsaid between them, so many feelings neither had dared to voice. But before either could speak, the comm system crackled to life. "All ships, prepare for jump," Admiral Zenva's voice rang out. "May the stars guide us to victory." Zack and Lyra shared one last look, then turned to their stations. The Lucky Break hummed with power as it prepared to make the jump alongside the Resistance fleet. As the stars stretched into lines of light around them, Zack Ryder, once a lone scavenger, now a key player in the fate of the galaxy, allowed himself a moment of reflection. Whatever the outcome of this battle, he knew his life had been forever changed by the legless alien girl he'd rescued from the depths of space. The Lucky Break emerged from hyperspace into chaos. The Resistance fleet, a ragtag collection of ships from 100 different worlds, faced off against a sleek, uniform armada of Shadow Corp. Beams of energy crisscrossed the void, and explosions bloomed like deadly flowers among the stars. "Hold on," Zack called out as he expertly piloted the lucky break through the melee. Their advanced cloaking technology kept them hidden from Shadow Corp's sensors, but a stray shot could still spell disaster. Lyra worked furiously at her console, monitoring their systems and coordinating with the infiltration team in the cargo hold. "We're approaching the flagship," she announced, her voice tense but steady. "Prepare for docking." As they neared the massive Shadow Corp vessel, Zack couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. The flagship was a behemoth, easily dwarfing even the largest ships in the Resistance fleet. Its hull was covered in weapon emplacements and strange, pulsing nodes that Zack assumed were part of their mind-control technology. With a skill born of years of navigating treacherous asteroid fields and evading patrol ships, Zack maneuvered the lucky break into a blind spot near one of the flagship's auxiliary airlocks. The infiltration team, led by a grizzled veteran named Cora, prepared to breach the hull. "Remember," Lyra said, addressing the team through the ship's comm system, "our primary objective is to reach the central control room. From there, I can access their systems and turn their own technology against them." Cora, a reptilian alien with scarred scales and cybernetic enhancements, nodded grimly. "We'll get you there, Doc. Just be ready to work your magic when we do." As the team prepared to disembark, Zack turned to Lyra. "Be careful in there," he said, his voice gruff with emotion he wasn't used to expressing. "I've gotten kind of used to having you around." Lyra's silver eyes softened, and she reached out to squeeze his hand. "I'll come back, Zack, I promise." With a final nod, Lyra joined the infiltration team. Zack watched as they breached the airlock and disappeared into the bowels of the Shadow Corp flagship. Now came the hardest part, waiting and hoping that his friends would return alive. Inside the flagship, Lyra and the team moved swiftly and silently through the corridors. Lyra's knowledge of Shadow Corp's systems proved invaluable, allowing them to bypass security checkpoints and avoid patrols. As they neared the central control room, however, their luck ran out. A squad of Shadow Corp's elite guards, their eyes glowing an unnatural red from the mind control implants, rounded a corner and opened fire. The team took cover, returning fire with their advanced weapons. Lyra, her new legs proving their worth, darted from cover to cover, using her technical skills to short out the guards' implants when she could. In the chaos of the firefight, Lyra caught glimpses of the true horror of Shadow Corp's work. The guards fought with a mechanical precision, devoid of fear or hesitation. They were more machines than living beings, their free will stripped away by the very technology she had sought to perfect. As the last guard fell, Lyra felt a renewed sense of purpose. This was why they fought, to prevent this fate from befalling the entire galaxy. With renewed determination, they pressed on, finally reaching the central control room. As Cora and the others secured the perimeter, Lyra interfaced with the main computer, her fingers flying over the controls. "I'm in," she announced, her voice tight with concentration. "But they're fighting back. Their eyes, it's like nothing I've ever seen. I'm not sure how long I can maintain control." Outside, the battle raged on. The Resistance fleet fought valiantly, but they were slowly being pushed back by Shadow Corp's superior numbers and technology. Aboard the Lucky Break, Zack watched the battle unfold with growing despair. They were losing, and there was nothing he could do about it. Suddenly, a transmission came through from the flagship. Lyra's face appeared on the screen, her expression a mix of triumph and urgency. "Zack, I've done it. I've accessed their systems, but I can't shut them down from here. There's only one way to stop them for good." Zack felt a chill run down his spine. He knew that tone. "Lyra, what are you planning?" Her silver eyes met his through the screen, filled with a sad determination. "I'm going to overload their quantum core. It'll create a chain reaction that will disable every Shadow Corp ship and implant in the sector. But I won't be able to get out in time. No, Zack shouted, his heart racing. There has to be another way. We'll come get you, Will. Lyra shook her head, a small smile on her face. There's no time, Zack. This is the only way to ensure Shadow Corp is stopped for good. She paused, her expression softening. Thank you, Zack Ryder. You saved me in more ways than you know. Now it's my turn to save everyone else. Before Zack could protest further, the transmission cut out. He stared at the blank screen in shock, his mind refusing to accept what was happening. Moments later, a blinding light erupted from the Shadow Corp flagship. The massive ship seemed to implode, collapsing in on itself before exploding outward in a wave of energy that washed over the battlefield. As the light faded, Zack watched in awe as every Shadow Corp ship went dark, drifting lifelessly in space. The Resistance fleet, untouched by the energy wave, found themselves suddenly victorious. But for Zack, the victory felt hollow. He stared at the debris field where the Shadow Corp flagship had been, his heart aching with a loss he hadn't been prepared for. As the Resistance celebrated their unexpected triumph, Zack Ryder sat alone in the cockpit of the Lucky Break, mourning the alien girl with no legs who had changed his life and saved the galaxy. A new beginning. The aftermath of the battle was a whirlwind of activity. As the Resistance fleet rounded up the now defenseless Shadow Corp ships and their confused crews, Zack sat in numb silence aboard the Lucky Break. The reality of Lyra's sacrifice weighed heavily on him, a pain unlike anything he'd experienced in his years of solitary existence. A gentle knock on the cockpit door roused him from his thoughts. Admiral Geneva entered, her ethereal presence filling the small space. "Mr. Ryder," she said softly, her voice carrying both gratitude and sympathy. "Your actions, and those of Lyra, have saved countless lives today. The galaxy owes you a debt it can never fully repay." Zack nodded absently, his eyes still fixed on the viewport and the debris field beyond. "She's really gone, isn't she?" he asked, his voice hoarse. The Admiral was quiet for a moment before responding. "In body, perhaps. But her sacrifice, her brilliance, will live on." And she paused, causing Zack to finally turn and meet her gaze. "There's something you should see." Intrigued despite his grief, Zack followed the Admiral to Haven's main command center. The room was abuzz with activity as technicians and scientists pored over the data retrieved from the Shadow Corp flagship. One of the scientists, a multi-limbed being with crystalline skin, approached them excitedly. "Admiral, Mr. Ryder, we've made an incredible discovery. Just before the flagship's destruction, there was a massive data transfer. We're still decrypting it, but it appears to be, well, it's Lyra. Her consciousness, her memories, everything that made her who she was." Zack's heart leaped into his throat. "Are you saying she's alive?" The scientist waved his limbs in a gesture of uncertainty. "Not alive in the biological sense, no. But her mind, her essence, it's all here in the data. With time and the right technology, we might be able to bring her back," Zack finished, a spark of hope igniting in his chest. Admiral Geneva placed a comforting hand on Zack's shoulder. "It won't be easy, and it may take years. But if anyone deserves a second chance at life, it's Lyra." For the first time since the battle, Zack felt a smile tug at his lips. "Then I guess I've got a new mission." Over the following months, as the galaxy began the long process of rebuilding in the wake of Shadow Corp's defeat, Zack threw himself into the effort to resurrect Lyra. He worked alongside the brightest minds from 100 worlds, his determination and intimate knowledge of Lyra proving invaluable to the project. The Lucky Break, once a simple scavenger vessel, became a mobile research lab. Zack traveled to the farthest reaches of known space and beyond, seeking out exotic materials and forgotten technologies that might aid in their quest. During his travels, Zack found himself changed. The cynical loner was gone, replaced by a man with a purpose. He made friends among the various species he encountered, forged alliances, and even helped mediate disputes between worlds. The skills he'd honed as a survivor now served him in building a better galaxy. A year after the battle, Zach stood in a lab on Haven, watching as a team of scientists prepared to activate a new kind of quantum computer. Within its crystalline lattice lay Lyra's consciousness, painstakingly reconstructed from the data she'd sent in her final moments. As the machine hummed to life, a holographic projection flickered into existence. Slowly, it coalesced into a familiar form, Lyra, her silver eyes as bright and inquisitive as ever. She looked around, taking in her surroundings, before her gaze settled on Zach. A smile spread across her face, and when she spoke, it was with a mix of amazement and joy. "Zach, it worked. You did it." Zach stepped forward, his hand reaching out instinctively before remembering she was just a projection. "We did it," he corrected, his voice thick with emotion. "Couldn't have done it without you, partner." As Lyra marveled at her new existence and the scientists celebrated their success, Zach felt a sense of completion he'd never known before. This was just the beginning, he realized. With Lyra's mind intact and her knowledge preserved, they could continue the work she'd started, using technology to improve lives rather than control them. In the days that followed, news of Lyra's resurrection spread throughout the galaxy. It sparked debates on the nature of consciousness, the ethics of artificial life, and the potential for immortality. But for Zach, it was simpler than all that. His friend was back, and together, they had a whole universe to explore and improve. As they prepared the lucky break for their next adventure, Zach couldn't help but reflect on how far he'd come. From a lone scavenger drifting through life, he'd become part of something greater. He'd found friendship, purpose, and maybe even love, all because he'd taken a chance on a strange alien girl with no legs. Lyra's holographic form appeared beside him in the cockpit, her eyes twinkling with excitement. "So, Captain Ryder, where to next?" Zach grinned, feeling the familiar thrill of anticipation. "Wherever the stars take us, partner. We've got a galaxy to help rebuild, and I can't think of anyone I'd rather have by my side." As the lucky break lifted off from Haven, carrying its unique crew into the vast expanse of space, Zach Ryder knew one thing for certain: his days of being alone were over. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever wonders awaited discovery, he and Lyra would face them together. The stars stretched into lines of light as they jumped to hyperspace, embarking on a new chapter in their extraordinary journey. The human who once had no friends and the alien girl who once had no legs had found in each other something neither had expected: a home, a purpose, and a bond that transcended the boundaries of biology and technology. As the lucky break vanished into the depths of space, it carried with it the hope for a brighter future, not just for its crew, but for all the beings of the galaxy whose lives they would touch on their endless voyage of discovery and redemption. The end, or perhaps just the beginning.